So we're on the third Sunday of a sermon series called Our Money Stories. And if you have been following along in the devotional booklet, this Sunday is called Reimagine. And the idea throughout the entirety of the devotional booklet that has gone along with the series is, while collectively here in worship we're examining the idea of us as Christians, us and the ancestry of our faith, our money story. With the devotional booklet, we are looking at our own individual money stories and how we view money and how we've encountered money has shaped our story. And today we continue in looking a little bit both at how our story that we have known in the past has an impact on us presently, and as we begin to look into the future and our call from God going forward. The Spirit has been at work on me on this series, and I am grateful for it, and it has not been the easiest for me, I confess. I recognize that in particular for today that I come with wrestling and some desire for the escape button, to not want to engage in some prodding of the Spirit that I feel provoked, and yet I plead for your patience and pray for your courage. Realize that when we worship God, we worship God collectively and together. Especially when we come across passages that cause us maybe discomfort, passages that may cause us to be provoked or to examine hard truths that we would rather not face. The Leviticus passage that Pastor John read is enough in of itself to have its own 6-week series on all by itself. There's enough to unpack in that passage all by itself that it can stand alone, both from the beginning with this idea of what is it that we should do with all that we are growing and harvesting and that which we have in abundance. What should we do with that is so much of what we collect and hoard and keep for ourselves? Yes, what should we do with it? We know that there are always going to be those in our midst, those in our surroundings who will never have enough. And the call of God, it is not just in this one part of the 8th chapter of Leviticus that tells us, leave some for the others. Set aside some for the others. Common sense would tell us if you see someone hungry and you have more than enough, share. What is it that the poster says, right? Everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. If I have it, why am I allowing it to go to waste and mold and throw it out of my compost instead of sharing? And it is the economy of God. It is the will of God. It is the desire of God that we would be smart, that we would be sensible and compassionate, and to be forward-thinking enough that there are going to be travelers in our midst. There are going to be those who are on our corners who, despite how it is that we may stigmatize them, despite how it is that the story of our world may write about them, there are those who are going to be asking for help. And the call of Christ upon all of us is, we all have more than enough. And to be sensible and to set some aside But then in chapter 25 of Leviticus, it takes a turn that I promise I have never in the entirety of my life ever seen it witnessed. I promise, probably, I feel confident in saying, because I've studied history a good bit, I promise that there isn't anybody alive in this room or online watching that has ever witnessed what the Bible talks about in Leviticus chapter 25, and that is a year of Jubilee. That in the 50th year, that there would be this time of a year of Jubilee. This passage opens up with this idea of a week of years. And what that means quite literally is, in verse 8, what quite literally is a Sabbath of year. That 50th year is going to be a time of rest and reimagining. A time of rest and reimagining. Much like we have the seventh day, a time of rest, a time of divine connection and sacred encounter with God, we're going to set aside a year of Jubilee, a year of unburdening ourselves for the sake of our relationship with God, but also for the sake of others in our midst. Those who are in our community that we are in relationship with, but also for the sake of those who are going to be traveling through, that we know to anticipate and to expect a year of Jubilee. It is called Jubilee, and it is to begin on Yom Kippur, a day of atonement. What is Day of Atonement? Anyone? A day, what's that? At one-ment with God. Yes. What else? Forgiveness. Yes. It is a day of forgiveness. It is a day of reconciliation. It is a day in the tradition of our ancestors, a day in which, a time in which, and especially in the year of Jubilee, that the slaves and the prisoners would be set free. They would be slaves and prisoners no more. Have you ever in all of your lifetime lived in a day in which all slaves and all prisoners were set free? Have you ever in a day of your life lived when all debts were canceled? That is Jubilee. That is biblical Jubilee as outlined in Leviticus chapter 25. A year in which all debts. And is this to happen one time? How often? On the 50th year. And I have lived 46 years, and I've never witnessed it. Chances are that in 4 years, I probably won't witness it. I dare say there's probably a few folks in here, not many, that are older than 50. My guess is, because I've studied history, that y'all have never witnessed a year of Jubilee. We're recording worship, maybe as a time capsule. I hope that I'm wrong, that someone 100 years from now could watch this and say, aha, we did it, a year of Jubilee. Do you know what it's like to feel having debts erased? It is remarkable. When I went to college at Austin College in the late 90s, it was $21,000 a year, which by today's standards seems like a heck of a deal, right? Adjusted for inflation, because I checked this fall, at Austin College in Sherman, Texas, 1 hour north of Dallas, the entering price for 1 year of tuition is now $69,000. That's tuition, room, and board. And for me, at the time, was $21,000. That's a lot of money. And that's a lot of money from someone who has no money. And so what does someone who has no money have any business doing at a school that costs that much money? To God be the glory. There were some people who thought it was a good idea to build some scholarship funds, so folks like me could go to college at a school like that. Awesome. And I had some of those. To God be the glory that there were some federal assistance programs that I could do some work study and have some grants. To God be the glory that those programs exist. Awesome. And yet there were a lot of loans. And by the time that I graduated college, there was $50,000 worth of loans. That is a lot of money. Do you know how much time it takes to pay off $50,000 loans? Do you remember my story from 2 weeks ago that when I got out and I stupidly encountered another $80,000 worth of credit card loans? Do you remember you know how much time it takes to pay off $130,000 worth of loans? It takes a long time. It is not like a wave of the magic wand. And to God be the glory for this amazing denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA. Someone somewhere at some point said, you know what we ought to do? For those who are willing to go into the ministry, who are not seeking to go into this profession for the paycheck, because I believe you and me, no one goes into the ministry of Jesus Christ and serves the church in the ways that we do for the paycheck. To God be the glory. How do we take care of them? And the Board of Pensions of our denomination said, we're going to develop a program that is going to rapidly erase all of the educational debt for all of our ministers. And about 2016, 2017, they launched this program. And at that time, I had about $22,000 of educational debt still remaining. And within 2 years, I had zero. I made monthly payments of $225 a month, and they matched it by paying $825 a month on top of my $225. And within 2 years, I got my "you are all paid off" note. Jubilee comes from a Hebrew word that means the blowing of the ram's horn. I promise you, there was the blowing of the ram's horn in celebration that night. It feels amazing to be unburdened, to be forgiven of a debt, to be loved and to be cared for, and to know that there are these people in this world who say, we are going to take care of you. I have never met you by name. I don't know who you are, but I know that it is a calling upon me as a Christian to do what I can do to support the economy of God that extends beyond what I can see, beyond the panes of window of this sanctuary, beyond the sidewalk that outlines the perimeter of this church, beyond the zip code that defines this property, beyond the area code in which I live. We are going to do what we can do according to what God has laid out for us, because we strive to give witness to the economy of God in this world, in a world in which it is beholden to the economy that is created by man. The question for me isn't how did he accrue $50,000 worth of college education. I wonder if we don't flip and reimagine that question differently. Why does higher education cost $69,000 a year? Which is what my son will have to pay to get the same education I got. We can ask that question a lot of different ways, but I specifically want you to look at the way in which Jesus addresses it in the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 12. In the economy of God, in the economy of the idea of jubilee, of forgiveness, of being freed, and living into the economy of God, hear these words. Mark chapter 12, beginning verse 38. As Jesus taught, Jesus said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, to have the best seats in the synagogues, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour the widows' houses and for the sake of appearances, they say long prayers. They probably also give long sermons. They will receive their greater condemnation, or an email on Monday. Jesus sat down opposite of the treasury, and he watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. And many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which were worth a penny. Now, y'all may be familiar with this. We call this passage, many of you may colloquially identify this passage as the widow's mite. Have you heard this before? Familiar with it? The widow's mite. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. And then Jesus said to his disciples and said to them, called to them and said to them, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had and all she had to live on. God's word is a lamp to our feet and a light unto our path. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. This is a passage that has been read, used in a variety, in many different ways, especially during a season of stewardship. And it is one that the common viewing of this passage, the way in which we approach it, look at it, preach it, proclaim it, and wield it for the purposes of building stewardship theology within the congregation is, look at how great this poor widow, how faithful she was at giving all that she had for the glory of God. Yay, hooray, huzzah, you should do the same. There is a sermon to be made there, and I don't mean to be entirely flippant at that point of view. But I want to draw your attention to the second hymn that we sang today and look at these words that we sang. We sang, the widow gave a penny. Now she's outgiven the rest. Her gift was all that she possessed. Now what you give is what you keep. Not what you give, but what you keep is what the king is counting.